Hello,
I'm Roger Sutton, editor-in-chief of the Hornbook, and I'm thrilled to be here today to present the 2021 Boston Globe Hornbook Award for Nonfiction to Paula Yoo for From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry. Paula, have your silver bowl.
thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm so pleased.
Very honored, and thank you so much to the Boston Globe and Hornbook for this honor.
I really want to know how this book came about, because when one looks at your bibliography of children's books, one does not see this book coming.
That's true. I would say I've actually been thinking about Vincent Chin. If you do the math, for half my life. I first heard about him when I was in college. This was back in the late 80s, early 90s, and a documentary about Vincent Chin called Who Killed Vincent Chin came out. It was nominated for an Academy Award, and that was the first time I had heard about him. And after I graduated from college, I became a journalist. So I was working at the Seattle Times, and I got a job offer to work at the Detroit News. And the minute I heard I had a job offer to live in Detroit, the first thought that came into my mind was, but what about Vincent Chin? I'd just seen that documentary in college. And in fact, all my Asian American friends, especially my Asian American journalist friends, all said, it's a great job offer, but you're going to Detroit. That's the land of Vincent Chin. That's where Vincent Chin was killed. So I was a little worried because I'm an Asian American and I drove a Nissan at the time. And here I am going to Michigan, which is home of the big three, GM, Ford and Chrysler, and this killing was based around, there was a lot of allegations that it may have been a racially motivated crime because of the conflict that was happening at the time in the early 80s between the American auto industry and the Japanese import cars. And Vincent Chin was Chinese American, of course. So there were all those allegations of, was this racially motivated, this crime. So that's actually how I first heard about him. And he's just been on my mind since the mid 90s, I would say. And I think the reason why the book came about was I was between writing projects and I was talking with my book agent, Trisha Lawrence of the Aaron Murphy Literary Agency, and I love them so much. And she asked, what are you working on next? And I said, well, I've got some time. And I started thinking about Vincent Chin again and thought maybe this would be a good time to work on my screenplay, because I also write for TV and movies. And when I told Trisha about it, her first response was, this should be a narrative nonfiction book for young adults. And then I realized, oh, she's completely right. And
what have I gotten myself into?
Exactly. And then just went down the rabbit hole. But it I think was the best suggestion. I think it lives best in that genre, because looking back as I did all this research, I realized I learned about Vincent Chin in college just because I happened to catch this documentary, and it wasn't taught to me growing up. And then I started realizing a lot of Asian American Pacific Islander history and images and stories and novels, history lessons, not really taught in kindergarten through 12th grade, very rarely, if ever. And that's why I realized, oh, I do need to write this book for high school students, because kids, high school students, they should know about this history. So that's kind of my loss. Sorry, it's my loss. I write long books, so I'm long-winded.
Well, one thing that amazes me about this book is I'm not going to get this word right, propulsion, that it just keeps going and building, and that the chronology is followed, so you don't ever get confused. But you also manage this trick where every time you introduce a new person, not a character, but a real person into the book, you give us this beautifully concise but completely involving sort of capsule history of that person as it relates to this story. And so we learn about each one of the players. And it's complicated. I mean, this is not an easy story about this heroic young man killed by this horrible racist man, right? It's really, really complicated. I mean, I don't know if you meant this, but I had a lot of sympathy for that judge, that first judge,
Judge Charles.
who, and why he made the decision he made.
Mhm.
How did you, when you went to write the book, did your perception of what happened in all these events change, deepen, darken?
That's a great question. And thank you again for your kind words. I would say too, writing about all the characters or the real people involved, their backstories meant a lot to me, because as I researched their lives, I realized they were all in a way kind of fated to be part of this case, because all their life experiences led to either their expertise or the situation that got them involved with the Vincent Chin case. And it was really amazing as I dug into their histories to find that out. I think my training as a journalist and as a screenwriter also helped, because when you write a TV show or a movie or a novel, or you tell a story in a newspaper, you're always not that you're trying to be dramatic, but you're always trying to find what's the emotional angle. What's at the heart of that story. So that's how I approach all my nonfiction. All my storytelling is, from the heart. It's emotion. It's about character. So that's kind of why that setup happened. But in terms to your question, and I love the phrases of, did it deepen my knowledge? Did it darken, my emotional state? And I would say yes to both, because the way this story has been presented, and again, because I mentioned that Asian American history and our stories are not taught in depth in schools, a lot of it is, a lot of our history is urban legend. It's just random facts here and there, or cliches, or just very broad strokes. And nobody knows the nuances and the depth of our history and our contributions to this country. So when I first heard about Vincent Chin, yeah, it comes off as an easy movie, if you will. It's, evil, racist, horrible villain, and innocent, Asian American man who is caught up in this horrible killing. And yes, the crime is horrible. It's brutal. It's devastating. It's tragic. It's wrong. It never should have happened. And there was a miscarriage of justice. Having said that, when I started peeling back the layers of the onion, I started realizing, oh, this is not good versus evil. There's a lot of nuance and depth. It's a lot of how people are raised. I think it lends to the conversation of racism in this country. I was a little surprised by the nuance, and also the twist ending that at the end of the day, the killer is found not guilty. He was found guilty in the first trial. There was a technical error, so there was an appeal. There was a second trial, which I didn't know about, and then he was ultimately found not guilty due to that error in the first trial. And I realized, oh gosh, this book is going to be harder to write than I thought. It's not cut and dried. It's very complicated, and there's internal bias, there's microaggressions, there's societal influence, and I started thinking, actually, I hate to say it, I'm glad this book is more complicated and more nuanced to write, because we do not do justice to the dialogue on racism if we only talk about the easy stuff. And by the easy stuff, I mean you're only racist if you actually say a racist slur, or you wear a white hood and you're part of the KKK. It's not easy. That's difficult and hard, but that's a little bit easier for people to think about racism as it's good versus evil. And I'm a good person. I shovel the snow off an old lady's driveway. I give money to charities. I'm a good person. I can't be racist. And that's what led to the problem of things like the Karens that we had recently, the rise in anti-Asian racism because of the pandemic, people, blaming China for the virus and so forth. And so I realized, in order to have a proper and realistic and authentic and productive conversation on racism, we have to talk about it all. We have to talk about the Karens. We have to talk about the internalized unconscious bias that people are raised with. We have to talk about each and every one of our own specific set of privileges that we have, and as a Korean American woman, there are certain privileges that I have that people who aren't like me, they don't have these privileges. But then there are other people who have privileges that I don't have. We have to discuss all of this. And so That's why, yes. So I would
But
say,
even your killer, your killer who insisted until the end, or is still insisting, I guess, that he wasn't a racist. I don't have a racist bone in my body, but you can see from your book why he believes that.
Mhm.
He's being sincere.
Yeah, and I think that's because he's being sincere, and with his declaration of I'm not racist and I'm remorseful for what I did. Um, that's because of how people are taught what racism is. And we're taught again that racism is good versus evil. It's like if you've never said, a racist slur in your life, if you've never done an act of racism, that does not mean that you're not racist or that you do not benefit from how systemic racism is set up in our country. You benefit from, if you are white and if you're a cisgender male, white heterosexual man, there are certain things that you don't have to think about every day. Whereas people of color, Black men, Asian American women, the LGBT community, like there are certain things that we're constantly reminded of that people of privilege are not. And so I think being protected like that, it's very shocking then when you find out that, oh my gosh, I may have done something racist. And I'm not talking specifically about Vincent Chin now, I'm talking in general about everyone in this country. That's why you have the Karens that get remorseful. They see someone filming them and they start crying and they say, no, I'm not that person. I just saw something that I conceived was wrong and I'm trying to make it better, not understanding that their privilege, the optics aren't good, in terms of calling the police on somebody having a barbecue at a park. And I think racism, it's not just about, well, it is about the government setting up parameters that benefit people who aren't of color. Yes, we have that. But racism, I think when we think about racism and am I racist or not, I think it's also about thinking about other people, being considerate. It's like I'm fully vaccinated. I still wear a mask because I know some people can't be vaccinated for certain medical reasons, or they choose not to be vaccinated. And I am wearing a mask to protect them. I'm constantly thinking about the other person. And that's what it is with race, with homophobia, with transphobia, with ableism, with all the, sexism, misogyny. We have to always be thinking about everyone else. It's not just about us. And that's the same with racism. And I think that when you are raised in a protective bubble, you have a privilege, and that privilege can come off, I think, as selfishness and narcissism and being inconsiderate. And if people do not consider themselves inconsiderate, if they consider themselves a kind person, then kindness is not just being kind. Being anti-racist is not just being anti-racist. You have to do it at an active level. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. But it also makes me think about the difference between what you're saying here and what you do in your book. Because in your book, you stick completely to the facts. I mean, I can't remember the last time I've seen something so deeply sourced published for young people. It's amazing. And you also keep yourself out of it. Like, I wondered why, how did she find about the story? What was the connection? Where is she? But you're not in there. It reminds me of Russell Friedman. I don't know if you ever read him, one of our pioneer nonfiction writers, for young people from the 1950s on, that you disappear. At least, you know what I mean? You don't keep inserting yourself in the story. You let the story be its own story. You let the facts speak for themselves. And it's almost a triumph of not doing something. Do you know what I mean? I mean, weren't you tempted to and here's why this is terrible?
Yeah, it was emotional writing the book. I would say my years as a newspaper journalist taught me to, take a step back. You're not the story. As a journalist and as a nonfiction writer, I'm not the story. I'm not the center of it. I'm the witness. And it's funny too, because people always say, you have to be objective in journalism. And I actually disagree with that, because I don't think you can be completely objective, because you're human. I think what you can be is fair. You have to let both sides talk. And then you still have to make a little bit of an assessment, a little bit of a judgment call at the end. You say, I let both sides speak, but this is ultimately how I feel. I do let both sides speak to the case. But when you get to my afterword, which is written in first person, then you know where I stand. Then you know how I feel. But I think it would have done a disservice to the book had I inserted myself in first person, or even wrote a prologue about how I felt about the case. And I did that too on purpose, especially because it's young adult, because I want students in the classroom. You're part of a jury. So I present the book as if the reader is a member of the jury. So at the end of the book, what would you decide if you were a member of the jury? Is the killer guilty or not guilty of violating Vincent Chin's civil rights?
I was so mad that the prosecutors didn't show up at the, wait, do I have the side right? The people who didn't show up at the first trial for the sentencing.
Yeah, that was frustrating. I do have to say, it's not that they did not show up on purpose. They could not, because back in the 1980s, Detroit unfortunately had a terrible nickname, which was the murder capital of the world, because at the time, because of the recession, because of what was happening with the layoffs in the auto industry, because of the history of Detroit, and the black-white racism, the history of that racism, it led to, by the 1980s, it having one of the highest homicide rates in the country. So the prosecutor's office completely unable physically to go to every single hearing. So yeah, it's domino effect. It was just the one day,
Right.
the one hearing that the prosecutor's office could not physically attend. It was this unfortunate domino effect. And you're watching it going, if only, a lot of this is, if only the Detroit Tigers had won the game, Ronald Evans and Michael
Right.
Nance would have been at a baseball game, they would never have been at the club. If only. There's so many of those what ifs. And I will say that one of the benefits to the Vincent Chin case was his case and other cases are the reason why in Michigan, the prosecutor's office now has to show up to every hearing. So in terms of scheduling, in terms of what they do, no more excuses. And also because of Vincent Chin, victims' families they have to be told about the hearing, and they have to be allowed the opportunity to deliver an impact statement and to have a voice. So because Vincent Chin did not have a voice during that hearing, his death was not in vain, because his death and other people in similar situations now give people today, a much fairer hearing and a chance to speak out. So although we lost the battle, I don't think we lost the war, because at least there are tangible after effects that this case has had, which I'm grateful for.
Right, that for Vincent Chin obviously did not win. His family did not win. Even when they secured that civil judgment for damages, there wasn't any money, so they didn't win that. But,
Yeah.
now we have a documented history, and you're part of that. I hope you're really proud of your contribution to explaining to the world why this story matters.
Well, I really do appreciate that. And thank you again. And I just will say that I'm grateful to all the activists and the lawyers, the people involved in the actual case, the activists, the family, the friends, Jared Lew and his mother. They're the ones who should be proud. And again, I'm just a witness. I write down what I see, and I hope that kids learn from this. And I think also another big takeaway I hope kids learn about the conversation of racism is that anyone can be racist. Anyone can, you think it can't happen to you because you're a good person. That's not the point. That this is an active fight that we have to always be vigilant about, and we have to speak out for everybody. I think one of the things I just wanted to bring up about the book that I found very inspirational was how all the different communities, churches, synagogues, the Black community, Latinos, all the different communities got together to fight for justice for Vincent Chin. And that was very important to highlight in my book, because I feel at this point, especially at this point with our fractured country, I can talk all I want about anti-Asian racism, but I'm not doing my community or other communities or our country any good if I also don't say I stand up for the LGBTQ
Mhm.
community. I stand up for Black Lives Matter. I stand up for trying to not be ableist. I stand up for women's rights. I stand up for people who come from socioeconomically disadvantaged
Right,
backgrounds.
it's a principle you're
Yeah, we
standing
have
up
to
for.
fight for everybody. Yeah, we have to stand up for everybody, and everybody, I hope stands up for me as well, and vice versa, because we will not make any progress if we all don't fight together. Because it is about, I think the next discussion about racism is not just recognizing that racism exists. I think the next conversation for the next several years is going to be about solidarity,
Mhm.
in all our communities. I think that's the next big frontier to be discussed in racism.
Well, we are very glad to be in solidarity with you for this marvelous book, and the complete title of which I wish to read because I couldn't have it memorized when I gave you your bowl. Okay. Paula Yoo, Boston Globe Horn Book Award winner for nonfiction, for From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry, The Killing of Vincent Chin, and the Trial That Galvanized the Asian American Movement. Thank you so much, and congratulations once again.
Thank you very much for this honor, and congratulations to all the other winners and recipients. It's a complete honor to be on this bookshelf with all of you.
Glad you're a part of it. Okay, goodbye.